Hey guys, thanks so much for joining me today on this episode of DanamoBIM. We are going to talk about numbering rooms or spaces. You could do the same thing with spaces based off of a spline, which is just one continuous line. You can see here just in the sample file, going to go ahead and jump into a floor plan. Any floor plan that contains the rooms or spaces that you'd like to renumber. And I'm going to come to the Annotate tab and draw in a detail line using the spline tool. Now I'm not going to catch all of the rooms. I actually want to do this for my example just so it's really quick and dirty, but also so that I can ensure that I'm going to filter out rooms that do not intersect with my line. So you can see here I have my one continuous line. I'm just going to make sure that it, intersects all of the rooms that I need it to. Once again, it's not going to number all of the rooms. If you needed it to, you could just keep on drawing and capture all of the rooms, capture most of the rooms and renumber a few, whatever you feel is the most beneficial for you and your automation tool. I'm going to skip some of these inner rooms and the lobby and things like that once again, just to ensure that I'm feeding those out of my list, as well as just making it quicker here. Now, once I have that, both a view open with some rooms visible, as well as my spline drawn, I can go ahead and open up Dynamo to a blank new canvas. Now in this case, once again, I'm going to select rooms. You could select spaces the same exact way. We'll talk a little bit about the one node that would be different besides this one, right? Besides the actual category that you're selecting. So I'm going to select all of the rooms within my project here. I have it on automatic mode for now. Just like a schedule, right? You're selecting all elements of one category and all elements of category in view. So that would be my category, would be my rooms. For my view, current document, and the active view within the current document. And that will be the view that I look in. And we should, once again, because we're on automatic, get some rooms reported here. You can see we have 31 rooms, starts at 0. So we get a list of rooms visible in this view. So now that I do that, I'm also going to need to select my spline, right? So I'm going to do this through a select model element node. I like to go ahead anytime that I have something that's user facing that I'm going to need my user to select and interface with. I'm going to go ahead and make it a pink group. Select spline. And just by default, I'm going to go ahead and make it an input by right-clicking and checking is input. And that way I know for certain that it is in fact an input. Go ahead and select my spline there. You should see the element ID with my detail curve pop up there. Now that I have my spline selected, I can get its geometry. And we should start to see that three-dimensionally here within our 3D view start to get drawn there. Might need to zoom out or use our zoom extents tool to be able to see that guy. If we do not want to see it, we can right-click and turn off the preview. That's what you are so inclined to do. I kind of like to see it just to make sure that all my geometry is coming through. Now, to be able to do the same thing with our rooms, to be able to get the geometry of our rooms, we want to be able to get the curves of the room rather than the room itself. The room itself will just report as a point rather than a closed loop boundary of room boundaries, right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to actually ask for the finish boundaries. Now you can see here that there are two nodes, one for rooms and one for spaces. So this is the one node that is different if you wanted to interface with spaces rather than rooms. So I'm going to grab all of my rooms finish boundaries, and once again, because we have the preview turned on, it is on by default, we see the preview of all of those boundaries. I'm going to go ahead and get a polycurve by joined curves, because these are in fact joined, right? In order to be a room boundary, it needs to be joined. And you can see that I get actually a list of polycurves. And the reason that is, and you can actually see it here in my preview, is because it actually has the columns as room boundaries. So I'm going to need to kind of omit those from the list, and by doing that I can actually just essentially grab the first item of each one of these sub lists. Now if I just leave it as first item here, it's actually going to get the first list of lists. So in order to actually get the first item of each list, I'll just need to turn this on to use levels and get the secondary list with the first item. So now that I've done that, I need to pull both of these lines onto the same plane. Sometimes our detail lines and our geometry from the room finishes don't fall onto the same plane. So we're going to ensure that they do by essentially saying curve pull onto plane. And essentially I'm going to do this to both my spline geometry, which reports out as a NURBS curve, as well as the polycurves from my room boundaries. So the plane that I want to specify would be, so I will just look for plane and get the XY plane, plug that into both of these curve pull-out parameters. So essentially they're pulling down to the same plane. Now that I've done that, I'm going to clean up just a little bit. I'm going to group all of these elements and say these are my room curves, and I'm going to group these two elements here and say these are my spline curves. In this way, just keeping a nice organized canvas here can get really messy really quickly. So now that I have those, I have my spline curves and my room curves. I know that they are both at the same plane here. Essentially what I want to do is I want to ask them, do you intersect? Does my geometry from my rooms intersect the geometry from my spline? So I'm gonna pull the node does intersect. This would be my geometry, would be my rooms, the curves from my rooms, and the other that I'm intersecting it with would be the spline geometry. So you can see, once again, it is just pulling the first list, the first item in the list, this first polycurve, against the first and only curve from my spline. So what I need to do is right click and hit lacing longest. Run all of these elements against this point. And you should see a list of 31 or however many rooms you have in your active view, and a list of trues and falses as to whether they actually intersect your spline geometry. Now, if you drew a spline that you believe intersected all of the rooms, all of these should say true. You're good to go. However, we're going to go ahead and filter this out just in case maybe you work with this later and it doesn't have a room that intersects. It will still work. So we're going to go ahead and filter both. We're going to filter both our elements, our rooms, as well as their geometry, so that we get essentially the rooms as well as their geometry in terms of what intersects with that line. So we will go ahead and copy this down so that we have two filters. Our geometry intersect will be our Boolean, and we're going to pull both the curves for one intersection as well as the elements within the active view for our other filter list that we're filtering here. And we should get an in and out list here. And you can see 20, because it starts with 0, 20 rooms intersect with my spline that I drew. So we have both the rooms output as well as their curves. So I can go ahead, while I'm at it, group these guys and say intersecting rooms and curves. Now that we have our list of rooms and curves that actually intersect with our spline, we can go ahead and find out where those rooms intersect with the spline so that we can sort based off of that intersection. So the first room that intersects with the spline will get the first number, and the last room will get the last number. So rather than the does intersect, we're going to find intersect, geometry.intersect, and once again our polycurves will be our geometry, and the curve will be the other. So we're asking, do you intersect with it? Now once again, we need to put on the lacing of longest, just like our previous list, so that we can actually see all of that spline against all of our room curves, right? Rather than just one for one. So right clicking, turning on lacing of longest. Now you'll see we get 2 points. And the reason that is because if we look at our geometry here, our spline intersects twice on that room boundary. So we can just get the first one in the list once again, holding Control, dragging our list.first item over, and once again this has the lacing of the second level turned on so that we get the first item of each list. And now that I have that, we can find the parameter at point and sort by it. So let's search for parameter at point. This will be our point, our curve will be our spline, and we should get a list of numbers 0 to 1. Once again, we need the lacing of longest so that it looks against our entire list of points, in this case 20 points, intersections from our rooms to our spline. And now we can do a list.sort by key. And once we do that, we're actually going to sort our rooms based off of this key value. So once again, we have our rooms here that actually intersect our list of 20 rooms. That will be the list that we're sorting based off of our 0 to 1 list of rooms that intersect across that spline. So now we actually have the sorted list of rooms that we can actually go ahead and set our number to. So go ahead and create a group of this sorted list of rooms. And so essentially now what we need to do is create our numbers that we want to go ahead and set back to these rooms, right? What logic do we want to go ahead and build to set to these? Now in this case, I need to count the number of elements, right? We have 20, and based off of that, I can create a number range. So we'll just search for range. And in this situation, it looks for what number we're going to start at. By default, it starts at 0, which is perfect. What number we're going to end at, and what step we're going to go at. Once again, 1 is perfect. So what we need to do is we need to get a list.count of how many rooms we have, and that will be our end. So we should get a list of 20 elements, right? Because we have 20 rooms. And we run this the next time, depending on how many rooms get reported there, we'll have that number reported. Now essentially we need to pad this a little bit. We add a prefix, add a suffix, whatever it is that you need to do. In this case, I want to go ahead and number my rooms with a prefix and then a 3-digit number, right? So I'm going to go ahead and pad this number. So pad left, and it wants a string. So I'll go ahead and do a string from object to go ahead and get my list of 0 to 20 that are strings. So strings are character values rather than a number, right? If you add 2 strings together, you might get cat plus dog, right? Just cat dog. So once we do that, we can go ahead and tell this string what length we want it to be. We want it to have 3 characters, right? You'll see that some of our characters only need 1 0. Some of them need 2. And what character we want to pad with? We want to go ahead and pad with 0, 1 single 0, so that the ones that need 2 will get 2, the ones that get 1 will get 1. If we look at this here, we should get 0 to 20. Now you can see we probably don't want to number our room 1-0000. That's typically not a room number, right? So rather than starting at 0, what we'll go ahead and do is we'll move this over and start our range at 1. And that way, our first room number will be 001. We can go ahead and now add a prefix. Now in this case, I want my user to be able to specify what I want that prefix to be. Once again, I typically make my input values pink. So I'm going to go ahead and say specify the prefix here, make this an input. In this case, my rooms are in level 1, so they'll have a prefix of 1 dot. You could create a dictionary. Check out the video linked down below on creating a dictionary. It's on numbering by group. which essentially we do exactly that. We create a prefix dictionary based off of the levels, or maybe you want L1, L2, right? 01, 02, right? So based off of the level, it goes ahead and creates the key for you. I'm going to let my user specify, right? So rather than building in that dictionary, they can make it whatever they want. And I will add these two values together, concatenate them, right? Like cat plus dog. We're going to have 1 plus 001 all the way to 20, right? So now we actually have our numbers. Go ahead and create this group here. And so now you can go ahead and set these values back to our sorted list of rooms, right? Which is here. As you might expect, we're going to do an element dot set parameter value by name. Our sorted list will be our elements. Now this is probably a great time before we actually execute our number setting. Go ahead and turn this on manual, and I will go ahead and right click this, create a group. I like my execution groups to be orange, and say set numbers. Now our rooms have a parameter value of number when it comes to their room number. So we can just go ahead and hardwire that value in terms of the parameter name. If you were going to set different numbers to different values, you might want to use a string, make this an input, just like we did with our prefix, right? Our values will be our number range, right? 1.001 will go to the first one in the list, as we had mentioned. So once I run this, it will report out what rooms were updated. Now, to better see this, what I want to do is go ahead and put in a watch node so that I can see what rooms were updated. But in addition to the rooms that are updated, I'm going to go ahead and put in a list.create so that I can see the room numbers as well as the names, the room elements that have been set. You can also add the room names. Maybe you want to report that out as well. So I will go ahead and transpose this list so that I see essentially each one of these values with the room that it's being set with. Go ahead and group these together. I like my reporting to be in gray and say rooms updated. Set this back to my watch node, and I like to set this as an output. So go ahead and run this. We should see 1.001 got set to the first room that was intersected with our spline. So we'll go ahead and check that out in our rooms. There you go. Stair, the first one in our list, office, conference, and so on. Once again, as I mentioned, you could do this with spaces as well, very similarly, by essentially just switching out those two nodes, the rooms for spaces, as well as the room.finishBoundary. You would use space.finishBoundary. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you next time on DanamoBIM.